They're not keeping track of any of these no answers, wrong numbers, not interested. They're not keeping track of that process to figure out how many of these people did I not reach and I want to try to reach them again in a different campaign. So first, and I kind of touched on this a little bit yesterday, I think, let's talk about the difference and just like a little bit of vocab as we're moving forward. And that's the difference between prospects versus leads. What do you think the difference between prospects and leads is?
Prospect is initial contact, and the lead is actually someone that shows interest and wanting to sell.
Yeah. So a prospect is kind of like just your list, right? Whoever you're wanting to market to. You've had zero market response from them. Like you're trying to reach them. They're like a prospective lead, right? Somebody that you're trying to market to, trying to reach, but they haven't indicated a willingness or ability to sell. You haven't contacted them yet. A lead has given a positive market response. And what do I mean by that? They have said yes to selling their property. To call them a lead, we don't care about the timeline. We'll talk about timeline later in week 3 when we talk about lead management. But if they're just willing to sell, we're going to call them a lead. They have a willingness and ability to sell the property. So our goal really in marketing is to turn prospects into leads. That's what we're trying to do, right? And then we can qualify those leads and get those properties under contract, all that stuff. But the goal of marketing itself is to find the leads from the prospects. And I like to go over the vocab because what I've noticed speaking to people like in the community over time, like they'll say like, oh, I'm buying my leads from whatever data provider. But when you first buy a list, we don't categorize them as leads until they've indicated they're interested in selling. We would say that's prospects, if that makes sense. Okay. As you're calling, if that's your technique, unless you're using direct mail exclusively, but if you're dialing, if you're getting numbers, really what we're trying to find is correct numbers to homeowners, right? That's really our goal. If we can get correct numbers to homeowners, then we're going to kind of have, I guess, these are the main. So we're going to have not interested or leads, right? If you have a correct number, it's not interested or it's a lead, or it could be DNC is another possibility, right? But with either of these categories, not interested or leads, there is follow-up that's going to come into play. If somebody says they're not interested, but they're still open to talking, there is a follow-up that can come into that. Not interested can become leads later, right? So you just handle them a slightly different way until they're maybe in a place where they do want to sell. Right, so we're trying to generate leads, and what we often hear people talk about is they want to scale their business, they want to scale the company. So does anybody have, it's another one of those definitions that people sometimes they just think like more, let me call more people and I'll get more leads. Does anybody have an idea of like what scale means to them in their business?
Does it mean like just taking what you have and expanding it? Like, so if you can get 1 deal a month, try to get 2 deals a month.
Okay, yeah, that could be a
KPIs.
part of it. Hold on. I'm going to put expanding here.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, so these will be like our input. Anybody else have an idea about what scaling means? Like, what are we trying to make more of?
Higher revenue.
Increase revenue. Is there anything else that we're trying to do as we're increasing revenue?
Decrease expenses.
There we go. That's the one that people often forget, right? And a lot of times we also want to decrease time. So what commonly people will do or think about, or the idea they'll have is like, oh, I'm just gonna, hire 4 VAs so I can call a lot more numbers and then I'm gonna generate a lot more leads. But the definition of scale, so in business, we're gonna write this down, the actual definition. In business, scale means to increase revenue at a faster rate than costs or expenses, right? So we're wanting to increase revenue, but at a faster rate than what our expenses are costing us. So when we very first hire an employee, how we scaled our business? No, right? Like when we first hire an employee, that is a cost. That's an expense to our business. And it's going to take, we have to train them and we have to get them set up for success in the business with the hope that as they're trained, they start to increase revenue in their role, right? And so eventually that can create scale. But we just have to keep in mind that we want to, and that's what we're going to kind of do today with our marketing worksheet in a little bit, is we want to add those new softwares, add those new expenses, add those new employees at appropriate times in our business that makes sense for scaling the business, right? And we're going to talk about this in a second when we talk about marketing, is there tends to be, a lot of people that say like, oh, just, buy new data every month, call and call and call. The more people you call, the more leads you're going to get. And that can be true, but is it sustainable? And are you doing it in a way that makes sense, right? All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about some marketing strategies. So I'm going to kind of outline what we've seen other people, who are, maybe on YouTube or sharing their ideas, maybe what they kind of teach. So we're going to call this strategies. Oh, let me erase that. Sometimes I can't spell when I'm talking out loud. All right, strategies many follow. Like many people follow these strategies, right? So they're going to buy data. They're going to skip trace it. Okay. They're going to send it to a dialer. If calling is their strategy, it could be an SMS or whatever, but they're going to send it to a dialer. Then they're going to trash it. And then the next month or the next week, whatever, they're going to start that cycle over, right? They're going to buy new data. They're going to skip trace it. They're going to send it to the dialer. And let's just say like, you buy 10,000 records. Great. And let's just say you're using Propstream, so that's only $99, right? And then you skip trace it. Maybe that costs you $1,500. And when you do that, that generates 30,000 numbers. If we're saying, I'll just put it right here, 30,000 numbers. If we say that on average, you get 3 numbers per record, if we average it out, okay? And you're going to send it to a dialer, maybe 2 callers on the dialer is going to cost you $320, right? And so out of that, maybe that generates, what we're hoping is between dialing and throwing out the data that we're going to generate some leads. So maybe we generate 50 leads. And I'm just using some approximate numbers here, guys. And of those leads that month, if we even close 1 contract for $12,000, most people are like, yeah, that looks great, right? I spent, let's see, what was our total spend? Oops. I spent 100, 1,600, 19, 20. We'll just say $2,000 just to make it a nice even number, right? I spent $2,000 and the deal was for $12,000. That's a $10,000 profit in a month. And most people aren't making that in their 9 to 5, right? If I told most people you can spend $2,000 a month and make $12,000 a month, they would be like, heck yeah, sign me up, right? But there are some questions here. Is this scalable? Can we scale this? So what are some things that people don't tell you when they're promoting the strategy? Right? First of all, sometimes 30 to 50% of deals don't close. Something goes wrong. We didn't, and that's going to vary from person to person. We talked about that, earlier day. Some people don't put it under contract unless they're sure it's going to be able to close, right? Some people are maybe a little bit less, they don't hold it to such a high standard before putting it under contract. But just on average, like industry and average, 50% of deals don't close. And then as we're doing this, a lot of people are not tracking, how many no answers did they get? How many DNCs? How many wrong numbers? How many correct? How many people did we never reach? Sometimes people in this process, the only KPI they're really tracking is their leads, their contracts, their closing. They're not keeping track of any of these no answers, wrong numbers, not interested. They're not keeping track of that process to figure out how many of these people did I not reach and I want to try to reach them again in a different campaign. Not only that, but the next time you download 10,000 records and then skip trace it again, are you wasting money skip tracing the same numbers again? Hopefully, if you're using REISift, the answer to that's no, right? Because you're tracking that at least. All right. And then here's the other thing. Let's say that in your market, there are, 200,000 properties in your city, in your market, in your county. And if this strategy to dial through these numbers and then you get the next 10,000 properties, let's say it takes you a month. So if I divide that by the 10,000 properties a month, that's approximately, 20 months, or if you're doing it weekly, 20 weeks, whatever the case may be. Is that sustainable? Are you getting the most value out of the property? And so there's just a lot of holes in a strategy like this. Are you recycling it? Are you keeping track of how many attempts you've made? How many of those numbers didn't answer, so you want to call them again? How many of them were wrong numbers? How many correct numbers did you have? Really, the value in a real estate business can be, the correct numbers to homeowners. Tyler's talked about before that there are companies whose job it is to just call numbers and try to find the correct number to homeowners so that they can sell that information to other people, right? So as you're doing this work and you're finding correct numbers to homeowners, you should be tracking that. That's valuable information. You spent $2,000 to find correct numbers to homeowners. So make sure you're storing that information, keeping that information, keeping track of all of that. So we need to implement a scalable system to move data through. Systematically. I probably spelled that wrong. Keep in mind, in my former life, I was a teacher, but a math teacher, not a language arts teacher. So there'll probably be times where I spell things wrong. All right. So we want to implement this process, right? All right. So let's talk about kind of what we recommend. So first, I'm going to do some definitions. They're not always the most fun. But let's just talk about sequential marketing first. Like, what does sequential marketing actually mean? Hopefully you've heard that term, but let's write down, like, what does sequential marketing actually mean? So that as we're talking about it, we know everybody understands what it means. And this is going to be a general definition, maybe not exactly like real estate investment, but like just in business, what is sequential marketing? So sequential marketing uses several steps to keep in contact, to keep in touch. And I'm going to put for our case, so to keep in touch or make contact, because if we're talking about, for our purposes, marketing, we're trying to make contact with these homeowners with a customer. So for us, that would be property owners with a customer in a planned and sequenced manner over a measured period of time. So let's look at those words, right? A planned and sequenced manner over a measured period of time. So we are planning out, how are we going to try to reach those homeowners? You know, what are our strategies? Are we going to call first? How many times? How often? And then are we going to text? How many times? How often? For how long? Then are we going to do direct mail? Same thing. How often? How long? How many attempts are we going to make? We're planning all of that out so that it's in a planned and sequenced manner, and we're doing it in a way that we're going to reach them. And I'm going to add this part because this also applies to lead management. Regular contact or attempted contact is key. So we want it to be, you know, in a consistent, regular way, especially once we get to lead management, which we're going to talk about, which is another form of marketing. It's just now we have the correct number for that homeowner. We're still trying to manage that relationship and get them to sell their house to us specifically. So even then, regular contact is key, and having a planned and sequenced manner is still a type of marketing, even when you're dealing with lead management, right? All right, so let's talk about, we have two that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about today bulk sequential marketing and niche sequential marketing. And so we're going to talk about bulk first. So I'm going to give a definition for that, and then we'll kind of draw out a little diagram. Bulk sequential marketing So bulk sequential marketing focuses on systematically marketing. Oh, hold on, wrong word. Systematically targeting a large number of prospects using one marketing method at a time. We're going to write down the definition for niche in a minute because I'm going to draw the picture for this one first. But that's the main differences are with bulk, you're usually focusing on a larger number of prospects at a time, and you're using one strategy at a time. So maybe I'm putting, you know, several thousand prospects into like a predictive dialer because I want to do cold calling first. And then when I finish cold calling, I'm going to move to a different strategy. Whereas niche, you might be focusing on a smaller group of prospects, but you're doing all of those things at the same time. You're calling, texting, leaving a voicemail all at the same time. And so we'll talk about that more in just a second. All right, so with bulk, let's draw kind of a diagram to show what it could look like. So let's say kind of our same situation. We bought those 10,000 records. And we're going to send those 10,000 records into a cold calling campaign. When we do that cold calling campaign, maybe we're going to cold call them 10 times in a row. And then the ones that we haven't made contact with, we're going to send them into an SMS campaign. Maybe we do that, you know, 5 times. The ones we don't make contact with, we're going to send them into direct mail then. And maybe we send direct mail 12 times if you're doing like once a month for a year, for example. And then if we get return mail or we finish that cycle, then we're going to maybe send them into deep prospecting. So remember deep prospect. So RM is return mail. DP is deep prospecting. Deep prospecting is when you're like, and we're not going to cover it very much in the challenge because that's like a specific thing, but it's when you're, you haven't made contact with them in all these other marketing phases. So then you're going to be trying to find the number of their cousin and their brother and their son, and you're trying to reach them through a non-traditional means, right? You're doing research on them and trying to find, somebody with a relationship with them to try to make that contact, for example. So the reason I picked this, and you can rearrange this based on whatever your strategy is, but cold calling is usually the cheapest. SMS is a little more expensive. Direct mail is the most expensive. Deep prospecting takes a lot of time. And so that's why I've done it in this flow, right? And so let's say that we had, 10,000 records here. Maybe we get, we're going to get some not interested and leads and that kind of stuff in that process. Maybe only 7,000 go into the SMS, right? And then maybe only 5,000 go into direct mail. So there should be fewer going into each stage because you've made contact with some of them through that process at each stage. All right, and I'm going to draw just a little bit of a funnel here. Because as we're doing this, it's cycling down, and we're taking out all the wrong numbers. We're keeping up with those phone statuses. We know the wrong numbers. We know the DNCs. We know correct numbers. And we're also updating like statuses when we do make correct numbers, either lead, not interested, DNC. So we're updating phone statuses and phone statuses and property statuses as we go. We're updating. And this is what's going to come out of correct numbers. Leads, not interested, DNC, right? I put DNC on the phone status side too, because you could have a wrong number DNC. Like they pick up and you're trying to call Bob and they pick up and it's not Bob, but they say, don't ever call me again, dude. So you can have wrong number DNCs. And then you could also have correct number DNC, which means you don't call that, you don't, market to that property at all anymore. Are there any questions about the bulk marketing, like kind of flow before we talk about niche?
What was RM standing for again?
Like return mail. So if you send direct mail and then it comes back, return to sender, they couldn't complete, you don't want to continue sending direct mail. So you would tag it. And then usually people will do like deep prospecting on that if they're doing deep prospecting.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So the biggest difference between, the other strategy is that we're moving it through a cycle. Think about it like a conveyor belt, right? We're moving it through a cycle, and really the data just keeps getting marketed to unless we get a correct number to a homeowner. So if we haven't made contact, we move it to another stage of marketing. And even if you're not quite set up for this, and this is something else I want to talk about, because people come into the challenge at different stages, maybe right now you only do cold calling. You're not set up to do these other stages yet, right? That's okay. You're going to track it. You're going to tag it or update your attempts to do your 10 cold calling so that when later you want to implement SMS or you want to implement direct mail, you can do that because you've been tracking which records you've already called, right? And so you're not getting rid of any of the data. You're updating the data all the time so that you know where it's at in these phases. And some people go straight from cold calling to direct mail. They don't want to do SMS. Some people just do SMS and then direct mail. So you adapt this to whatever, you want to do, but you're tracking everything so that you can tell what records have I called but not texted? What records have I texted but not sent direct mail? And you can, because you're tracking all of that, you can filter by that and then put those records into the next strategy that you want them to be in.